reviews, discussions, and theories about films in horror, sci-fi, and genre. This is the Horror Deconstruction. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more.
Hey, what is up, everybody? It's the Horror Deconstruction, listening to your host, Komp. I want to thank you for listening, and give us a like, share, and subscribe before you do anything. Subscribe, let people know about the show. And today's film is Lord of Illusions, 1995. So, Lord of Illusions. A private detective gets more than he bargains for when he encounters Philip Swan, a performer whose amazing illusions captivate the world, but they are not really what everyone thinks. So directed by Clive Barker, written by Clive Barker, based on his short story The Last Illusion, starring Scott Bakula, Kevin J. O'Connor, J. Trevor Edmond, how about that one? Daniel Von Bargen, Joseph Lattimore, Sheila Tausey, Ashley Tesoro, Susan Traylor, and a whole bunch of other people, especially Famke Johnson. So this is a movie that I remember actually as a kid seeing a gigantic marquee for it. You know, one of those that when you're driving on the road and you see it just hovering over the cars, of this man in a T-pose with the giant phrase Lord of Illusion. So I never aware of much of Clive Barker's work. I knew that Pinhead existed. I knew of Hellraiser and all that stuff. And I just was not really into his books. I always thought there was always Stephen King. That was it when I was a kid. So very, very dumb. But getting into it, I realize now that I've seen all of Clive Barker's films that I was kind of amiss that why did he give up directing, but I can kind of understand why, because this is yet another film that the production studio stepped in and stepped on his editing. And I don't know if that's the case, because it seems to be that he still wanted to make films, but he's had some health problems. He actually went to go get his teeth fixed and ended up in a coma. And then he's, got some litigious deals going on. For the longest time, he tried to make a mummy film with Mick Garris, and that has not, been done at all. And he's trying to do a film about zombies versus Roman legionnaires, I believe. So we'll see. But I think he's not at the best of his health at the moment. I just heard an interview with him and Mick Garris on Mick Garris's Postmortem podcast. And that's a great show. So, if you want to listen to a great podcast where they interview horror legends, that's a great show. And he sounded fine. But I think that this is a director that actually makes the type of films that I like. Because, Danny and I did Hellraiser. It's just such a unique film. And Clive Barker is one of the rare kind of directors that actually is what you'd call a polymath. And where he does art, he does writing, and he does film. I wouldn't be surprised if he could actually play music. It'd be nice. But anyway, let's get back to this film. So this is a neo-noir horror film about a detective called Harry D'Amour. He's very down on his luck. He's what you'd call a usual staple of noir film, noir cinema. That sort of gritty detective that is very morose and has just a dark look on life. And he had just finished kind of being in a sabbatical after he was part of an exorcism case where a child had been possessed by a demon, and it went awry because I believe the child ended up dying. And Harry D'Amour witnessed that firsthand, so he's kind of in a stump. But that's not where the film begins. The film actually begins in the 80s, where there's a cult leader named Nyx, and he has recently kidnapped a young girl, and him and his followers are going to use this girl for some weird, some sort of ritual. And some ex-followers, led by Swan, who is played by Kevin J. O'Connor. He's awesome in the film called Deep Rising, if you want to check out a great seafaring monster film. And a lot of people give credit to Ghost Ship, but I think a lot of people sleep on Deep Rising, which is an incredible action horror movie. Just an incredible movie. Nyx and his pet baboon attack Swan. Swan is coming with two people. He comes in with a young woman and another guy. They have shotguns. They are the worst sort of people to use guns because they get their guns taken away from them pretty quickly. Except, a woman does. But Nyx's henchman, who's a really interesting looking dude called Butterfield. And Butterfield's like a really interesting character because at the beginning of the film, he just sort of looks like this transient, and by the end of it, he looks like some sort of cool character that literally walked out of a Clive Barker book. And they get into a tussle, they free the girl, and they bind Nix underground with this really cool mask. It looks like some sort of weird BDSM mask on him. And we jump forward a couple years. Swan was actually given some powers by Nix in this whole melee. I don't know why. I think he was just trying to possess him, but then it's by after effect he kept some of the powers, and now he's become some sort of a very lauded magician, like a performance artist magician. And I'm telling you, this guy Clive Barker knows what he's doing visually. He fits this sort of weird interest of mine with noir and horror, and I can't seem to find any other directors that do that, because Hollywood tends to just go for one thing. The only other noir horror film I know, I think, is called Cast a Deadly Spell, but I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it, which was, I think, was an HBO film back in the 90s or the late 80s. And with this film, there's just such a cool look to it. There's just such an interesting vibe to the whole film, where it feels like it's a noir film, a modern neo-noir film, and they have horror elements, and you never really see that. So that clashing of genres is so incredible, and that's, of course, why MGM gave crap to Barker throughout the whole production of this film. And like, I think one of the heads of MGM, they saw that, like, they mentioned that a child had died in the movie from the exorcism that I had mentioned before, and he said, we'll never see that in the movie again. And Clive Barker said, okay, I'll cut it out. So then he ended up just putting it back into the film. I ended up seeing the regular theatrical version, and I liked the theatrical version. I didn't know there was a director's cut. The director's cut, I believe, is 2 hours long, and the regular film cut is 1 hour and 47 minutes. So I'm going to go try and find the director's cut of this film, because it's the same issue with Nightbreed. Like, I don't think I liked Nightbreed, and Danny, I think, hated Nightbreed. But apparently there's something called the director's cut or the Cabal cut that people really like, and I believe that's on Shudder. So you can find this regular theatrical cut on Tubi, and I believe Nightbreed might be. I don't know where Nightbreed is streaming right now. But either way, you can see that a lot of Hollywood companies just do not appreciate Barker's vision. To be him now, when a lot of directors are able to actually release their director's cuts in theaters sometimes, like Ari Aster or stuff like that. But anyway, back to the film. We warp ahead in time, and we meet Harry D'Amour, who is a character that Clive Barker has used plenty of times in his books and in prose and stuff like that. I really got to look into Clive Barker's books, because he seems to write really interesting stuff. I listened to an audiobook of, not all of it, but Books of Blood. Some of the stories look pretty cool. I think there was a television adaptation of that recently, and I think people thought it was terrible, so that sucks. Hellraiser was an awesome movie. I actually still liked Hellraiser 2 also. Although I don't know if he had too much to do with that one, because he did only 3 films, which is like crazy, because you think of Clive Barker, I'm like, oh yeah, he did a couple of films, right? I wasn't really aware of what his directing gallery was, but it was only 3 films, unfortunately. And I think with the headache of Nightbreed, he was going in with trepidation into this film, his last film, and I think that, like, something must have happened when they just decided that Hollywood was like, well, you're in director's jail, you can't do anything. And there's been plenty of adaptations of and mutations of his movies or his stories, and not for the better, because you don't really hear much about Clive Barker's books as films, because you only think about Hellraiser, and that seems to be the only one that had any gas in it left. Which is unfortunate, because I could see why these films are like cult classics, especially this one, because it's so interesting and completely different from Hellraiser, as Hellraiser is different from Nightbreed. But there's certainly a talent that Clive Barker has, and I want to start getting into his books, because just the material alone, like the last, I think, semi-successful thing that was actually a flop was Midnight Meat Train, which is a really interesting film. I actually liked that film and the story that it was based on, which is in Books of Blood. People just did not like it. They just did not take that film seriously just from title alone. But back to this, we got Scott Bakula, who's obviously, anybody knows this character this actor from the 90s. He was in the show Quantum Leap, where he would jump from body to body as a guy who could not get back home in time and stuff like that. And he fits the role really well. I think this was one of the bigger roles that he went out for, and I think this sort of cemented him not being a leading man anymore for films for some reason. That's just how it is with film. There's certain actors nowadays, they will put certain actors in movies regardless. Like Ryan Gosling, I think, is an incredible actor, Like if you've seen Blade Runner 2049, he's great. He's just like a really good character actor, and also in the film by Shane Black called The Good Guys. And he just can't seem to get a hit with his movie. He never really gets a number one film, but they keep casting him over and over. And I think Scott Bakula has a leading man quality to him because he fits this character well, and he just never got that chance. It seems back then they were a little bit more harsh within putting actors in film and trying to make them work, because I think nowadays they have logistics and they have internet and stuff like that. They're like, oh yeah, this guy trends well with this type of people but not with this type of people, so they try to cast them and make some money back regardless. They're just really worried about money. But now, back then, they were just like, if you didn't make it in this, you're back to the television. So Harry D'Amour character, really interesting neo-noir type of detective. He's pitch perfect in this type of character role, is sort of gruff. If you ever seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit with Eddie Valiant, that actor who played him was obviously Super Mario Bob, the actor. That's a typical noir character, and that's what Harry D'Amour is here. He is a detective or private investigator that is really drawn to the darkness. I think obviously the books might shed a little bit more light on what that's about. I know that he's just this sort of, not a stock, he is a stock character, but he's interesting enough that Scott Bakula does a great performance with him, and apparently Barker really loved his performance. He was like, holy crap, my character's been realized on screen. We also get Famke Janssen as Mrs. Swan, who's Swan's wife. We ended up seeing later on in the film that there's a connection between her and Swan, obviously, when he was younger. I don't want to spoil the ending of this film. The film, Nix, is actually played by Daniel von Bargen. He was George's boss on Seinfeld in the later seasons. Unfortunately, Daniel von Bargen, which sucks, it's a very disturbing and depressing sort of trivia, which I'm going to give to you right now, and you can listen to it later if you want to, or don't, if you want to have a nice day. But he was suffering from diabetes, and I believe they amputated one of his feet, and they were going to do another amputation, and on the day of it, he shot himself in the head, but he messed up his suicide, and there's a recorded phone call of him talking to the police. Essentially, he has screwed himself by shooting himself in the head, and he has the cops pick him up. And I believe he lived for another 5 more years or so. I don't know. He lived a couple more years after that, but it's a very sad story because Daniel von Bargen is a very good actor, and he's great in everything he was in, especially in Seinfeld, and he's great in here as this sort of psychotic villain that you don't really see him much in the film. He bookends the movie as the big bad, sort of the Akira in Akira, the animated film. So this character that you actually do see him a little bit in the film in sort of human form, and then at the end I don't want to spoil it, but he's a little bit more supernatural, obviously. So he's this guy who has magic powers that it's not really touched upon in here. I'm sure, I don't even know if it's probably touched upon in the short story that Barker created with these characters, but I thought that he was great in the role. And I thought, going back to Famke Janssen, she does good as I guess she's not really a femme fatale in this film. I guess she is, because she's actually a very beautiful woman, and she's very quiet, and you don't know if she's in on this. But the basic premise of the film is that Philip Swan does a magical act where he is laying strapped down to a bed, and the production is really cool. Like, I was just looking back at this and I was like thinking how much money this movie must have cost, because then they have this whole big premiere in front of the show, and then like hundreds of people you see there, and then you see him in his studio, not his studio, but the stage where everybody's like watching the show, and you just see the show itself looks really good. Like, I would watch that show. Like, I'm sure this is like equal to one of those Las Vegas magician shows. Nowadays they would just probably green screen everybody in, but this was like old school, like Hollywood, like actual production, and when they cared about the art of people. Nowadays it's a little bit tough with the pandemic and everything, but I think it's really production wise, it's a beautiful looking film. I really like the look of Butterfield, because he looks like he stepped right out of a 1990s horror novel. His first look, obviously, he's just sort of this transient, dirty guy who's in the dusty fields. This is when they didn't have any money, I guess, then. And then later on, when he's older, and he has this really unique look with these sort of bleached eyebrows, and his eyes are a different color and stuff like that. And he has a henchman that looks like he reminds me of the character from D. Snyder's Captain Howdy. And there's not giant amounts of gore, but there's really cool visuals that are really dark and gothic. When the murder scenes, there's like a guy who gets basically pin-cushioned, and his death is pretty gruesome. And Harry D'Amour is sort of like, he's not infallible. He can get his ass kicked. He gets his ass kicked a couple times in this movie, but he gets stuff done, and you root for him as a character. I like in the film that he was originally chasing a guy for fraud, and he sort of gives it up to go deal with this. Although that fraud case would have got him, I think, $10,000, but I guess, chasing demons is more interesting. There's also Swan's. I'm trying to think of what Swan's not his partner, his guy. He has like a right hand man that has like a really interesting look with these light eyes and stuff. He's a pretty interesting actor. But I did like that they used the Magic Castle, which is an actual place, but it's a place where actual magicians go in and they have meetings and stuff like that. And I guess they trade tricks, or they just try to impress each other or something like that. But I think Neil Patrick Harris goes there a lot, and Neil Patrick Harris, if you know, is Doogie Howser, is I guess he's a budding he's probably better than a budding magician right now, but like he talks about that place called the Magic Castle this whole time. I don't know if they must open it up for like regular people. I'm not sure. I know it has the Magic Castle in this film has the worst security I've ever seen in a movie, because these guys kind of just broke in and they steal this valuable information, and all it has is a hologram of a fake monster. The monster looked cool. I think they just wanted to put some sort of creature effects in the film besides the ending, because it is sort of a regular film. Not regular, but there's no sort of running monster running around, because I think horror at the time wasn't doing as well, because for some reason other movies were doing well, and that's when Scream would come up a little bit after this, so that's when it had a big revitalization. But Scream was a very specific type of horror film, and you saw the multiple copies of that. So I think the whole premise of D'Amour, trying to figure out this. Oh, I didn't even get to what happened. So when Swan is on that gurney and there's knives or swords above him that start to fall, he dies on stage, right? This is the beginning of the film, so it's not really. And D'Amour is hired by his wife to look over his body, because I think she has an idea of what happened to him when he was young, when he and his friends had saved the life of that little girl, and his partners are turning up dead, and so she does it to protect his body, because she believes that something is going to be done with his body, and that's the general premise of the film. And she's not, I believe, romantically involved with Swan, so that opens up that sort of relationship that she might have a fling with Harry D'Amour. So there's this whole sexual tension between them. I don't know if that really works, because I think once you see her on stage and him, it's sort of I didn't really feel the chemistry between them two. I don't really look for chemistry between characters. It just sort of is like, oh, automatically a woman in a war film is gonna fall in love with the detective in the movie. They're never rejected. It just sort of is that like all these people are sort of attracted to darkness, and there's a central sort of mystery of who killed Swan, who screwed up the rigging of his device. I really don't want to spoil it, because a noir film is always about mystery. And I believe that the mystery, I believe, is good enough in this film. It's sort of something that I figured out about 5 minutes into what happened in the movie. But I think it's pretty good. I think it's good. That's just me. Apparently, a lot of people did not like this movie, or they just did not feel it. But this is a very specific type of horror movie where it's weird genre bending, which I really like with horror, because I hate just sort of clear cut movies that don't try to at least throw you a curveball every 5 minutes. Well, not every 5 minutes, but every 10 minutes. And I think that it works in stance. The music is good. There's some really funky 1990s special effects, but I think they work in this movie. There's this sort of an apparition that's made out of, and it's something that you don't usually see in horror films. And it's a disturbing sort of thing. It's like an apparition made out of shapes. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but it's this sort of, it's done with like these horrendous 90s CG, but it works because it's supposed to look bizarre. Like, if you've never seen something like that in your life, so it's like this creature that has like human form, but it's, or not even human form. It's just like these shapes of like hexagonal figures and stuff like that. It's really strange, and it happens in I think Swan's house, and it's really weird, but I thought it was so interesting, and I really want to go check out the director's cut of this film. If anything, that shows you how interesting Clive Barker's works is, that I want to actually see the director's cut of this film, which I believe adds about 15 more minutes, 14 to 15 more minutes. Same with Nightbreed. Nightbreed I'm a little bit more nervous about seeing, because I'm like, oh my god, I remember not liking it that much, but it also has, Cronenberg as one of the best like bad guys with one of the best masks I've ever seen in a horror film. This guy Barker really knows how to design his monsters and stuff like that, because the designs are so interesting, and he obviously is giving the thumbs up in the movie to what production images come through in the film. So I think in the long of it, I believe that in the short of it, I believe that the film is pretty good at what it was aiming to do in having a neo-noir horror film and a kind of a giant mystery. I solved the mystery pretty quick because I've seen 100 movies like these already. And I think that the final battle is interesting. I believe that the special effects are really good for the 1990s. I think they serviced the movie well. I believe that Harry D'Amour is a really compelling, interesting main character. It's unfortunate that you don't see his character, and hopefully, maybe there will be a revival and a sort of good reception to Barker's work down the road. It seems to be that his work just does not get really recognized for how, prolific he is. And I believe that, this is a movie that is worthwhile of being a cult classic. And it's really a shame that Barker did not make any more films, because I would love to. I'm sort of weirded out about that new film with the zombies versus Legionnaires. I don't even know if it's going to be done. It just says in IMDb it's in pre-production or something like that, which makes me think it's just going to be like some sort of weird CGI or green screen movie. Anything with Legionnaire movies, like with fucking Roman warriors, always seems to be, they can't afford a bunch of people anymore like they would in this film. But I would give this movie a 7 out of 10, a good 7, not like a wavering 7, but a good 7 out of 10. Being a magician, having a wife, dying, your wife bangs another guy, then they have to go fight a supernatural monster from the beyond. And with that, this has been the Horror Deconstruction.